And on that same day, we will begin the largest deportation operation in American history, larger even than that of President Dwight D. Eisenhower.
Immigration. Donald Trump has promised to do a lot with immigration and deportation. He's been promising it for the last several months in the lead up to him taking the White House on January 20th. Last week, I was on a panel on WIC TV's live stream about these immigration policies. I was taking the pro-Trump side.
DACA recipient, I don't give a shit. If you're breaking the law, time to go.
Wait, but if you're a DACA recipient, you came as a kid. I mean, that wasn't your choice.
I got two words for you.
You didn't break the law.
I'm scared.
I got two words for you. Tough titties.
In the run-up to that, I decided to do a lot of research to try to find a video that summarized all of his policies in one place. And I couldn't find a video. So I did a ton of research, looked at a ton of videos, and I thought, why shouldn't I be the one to make that video? So this is the video. It's a bit off the cuff, bear with me, but we're going to get through this and you'll learn so much about what Trump is going to do. I think we'll start with Trump's historic policies on what he said he was going to do on the lead up to his 2016 inauguration. I think this is important because Trump says a lot of crap. And so we have to separate what Trump said he would do and did do with what he said he's going to do and won't do. And so let's look at it. Trump made a 10-step proposal on exactly how he was going to do mass deportation. None of these steps happened. But despite promising this, Trump actually deported less immigrants than Barack Obama did in any of Barack Obama's terms. And Donald Trump also deported less immigrants than Biden did in any single year. And then in 2018, Trump laid out a 4-step policy. He wanted a path to citizenship for dreamers, which he has definitely reneged on. He wanted to increase border security. He wanted to end the diversity lottery. And he wanted to have restrictions on family-based immigration. The diversity lottery aims to immigrate from countries that have low immigration rates the previous year. And the restrictions on family-based immigration is Trump's attempt to stop chain migration, where you have someone who comes across and now they want to bring their sister and their uncle and all of that. And it kind of leads to an endless chain of immigration, and Trump wanted to end that. Trump also proposed rolling back birthright citizenship in 2015. That's almost certainly a violation of the 14th Amendment and jus soli birthright. You can't do it, and Trump didn't do it, and if he tried to do it, it would be overthrown by the Supreme Court. Trump also forwarded the RAISE Act, reforming American immigration for a strong economy. He sought to half green cards, to end the diversity lottery, and to cap refugees at 50,000 annually. A bunch of economists said this would lower the GDP by like 2%, and that jobs would fall by like 4.6 million by 2040, and it failed to pass in the Senate. The last main thing Trump did is he tried to pass Kate's Law. Catherine Steinle was killed on July 2015 by an illegal immigrant. It was an accidental discharge of a firearm that ricocheted off a concrete slab and hit Kate in the head. The illegal immigrant that killed her had already snuck into the country multiple times, and so Trump wanted to enact stronger minimum sentences on illegal immigrants that have been convicted of a crime. But it also failed to make legislative process, and since 2017 there hasn't been any update on it. So why are these things important to look at? Well, again, Trump says a lot of crap, and he doesn't necessarily do a lot of stuff. That's either because what he was saying was a bluff and he wasn't going to do it, or it's because what he said was absolutely pie-in-the-sky utopia for what he wants and is never going to happen, like repealing the birthright citizenship. So I think it's important to look at all of these things in context of what he says now. Trump currently says that he wants to deport 15 to 20 million illegal immigrants, which on its face is a problem because there's only 11 million illegal immigrants in the country. So there's going to be a bunch of millions of people that are just going to go. So with that in mind, let's look at what he's continuing to promise in 2024. The first thing is the thing he promised back in 2016, which was to end birthright citizenship. Again, this is not going to happen. This is not constitutional. It is a clear violation of the 14th Amendment. And I quote, "All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States." So how exactly is Trump planning on ending this when it's clearly a violation of the 14th Amendment? Well, as Trump said, and I quote, "On day one of my new term in office, I will sign an executive order making clear to federal agencies that under the correct interpretation of the law, going forward, the children of illegal immigrants will not receive automatic U.S. citizenship." He is hinging his entire argument on that part that we read, and subject to the jurisdiction thereof, and saying that if you're an illegal immigrant, you're therefore not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. But of course, you are, and this has been proved in previous Supreme Court cases. But to ease your worries, this again is not going to happen. As Hiroshi Motomura, a professor of UCLA School of Law, said, "I think that birthright citizenship is such a bedrock principle of American law that of all things on the Trump agenda, this is the least likely to be successful." Furthermore, the dean at Berkeley Law said, "President Trump cannot do this. President Trump cannot change the Constitution by executive order." And this all dates back to a Supreme Court decision in 1898, the United States versus Wong Kim Ark. To quote, The part of the 14th Amendment that we read makes clear that those born in the United States are citizens. So this has already been established case law for like 100 years by the Supreme Court. Now, the reason Trump does this is because he wants to decrease people coming across the border just to have a kid so their kid can have U.S. citizenship. And I get that. You want to find some way to discourage that and to have that not be an incentive. But we can't violate the Constitution no matter what Trump claims on Truth Social about doing exactly that. Now, if that's something Trump wants to do but is going to be unable to do, what's something that Trump wants to do that he will be able to do? Well, he will be able to deport some people, okay? He's probably going to start with illegal immigrants that have committed violent crimes, and this is what J.D. Vance has said. J.D. Vance thinks it's reasonable to deport 1 million immigrants a year, and he said in a New York Times interview, Trump will also try to reinstate the Remain in Mexico Act. The policy that says that if you're trying to claim asylum in the United States, you do your asylum claim at a port of entry and then you stay in Mexico until you get the result of the asylum claim. Currently, we have what's called catch and release, which is when you go into the interior to do your asylum claim, you're released with a court date, and then if you don't show up to the court date, now you're just there illegally, but no one has tabs on you. He also says he's going to declare a state of national emergency to get funding for the construction of the wall. He also wants to add 10,000 more Border Patrol agents. And of course, we have Trump's favorite thing, the tariffs.
To me, the most beautiful word in the dictionary is tariff.
He wants to tariff Mexico and Canada to stop the illegal immigrants. To quote Trump, we have to be tough and we have to be safe and we have to be secure. At a minimum, we have to make sure that we vet people coming into the country. So he is going to be deporting some people. Is he going to be deporting everyone? I don't know. The situation does look dire. Carolyn Leavitt is the person that he appointed to be his White House press secretary, and she said that Trump will marshal every federal and state power necessary to institute the largest deportation operation of illegal criminals, drug dealers, and human traffickers in American history while simultaneously lowering costs for families. But she also said that Trump would make provisions for mixed status families. Furthermore, Trump said that he would make appropriate use of special forces, cyber warfare, and other overt and covert actions to inflict maximal damage on cartel leadership, infrastructure, and operations. But it is hard to tell how serious Trump is when he talks about mass deportation, because he'll also say plans and operations that just never get brought up again. An example of this is Operation Aurora, which he mentioned once in a campaign speech about Aurora, Colorado, when all those Venezuelan gangs were taking over the apartment buildings. He said, "We will send elite squads of ICE, Border Patrol, and federal law enforcement agents to arrest and deport every last illegal alien gang member until there's not a single one left in this country." But Operation Aurora was never mentioned again. So a lot of times Trump will say a quote, but then never follow up with it again or give further details. So is he actually going to try to deport 11 to 15 million people? I don't know. So that's what Trump said he's going to do. But now, is this feasible for him to actually do? Well, from a cost point of view, this is going to cost a lot of money. The American Immigration Council estimates that it'll cost $315 billion to do this operation, or $967 billion over a decade. That's like $1 trillion to do this. It is very unfeasible to deport all of these people. Some economists predict that this will cause a 2 to 6% GDP shrinkage. Not to mention that agricultural output will fall between $30 and $60 billion if the flagship policy is carried out. But the thing is, Trump is adamant that he is going to do this. And I quote, "Really, we have no choice. When people have killed and murdered, when drug lords have destroyed countries, and now they're going to go back to those countries because they're not staying here. There's no price tag." But of course, there is a price tag. Everything has a price tag. Trump wants to enact the Alien Enemies Act and the Insurrection Act of 1807. The Alien Enemies Act allows the government to deport any male over 14 who hails from a foreign enemy country at the time of war. And if he's arguing that the invasion at the southern border is a time of war, then he can enable that act. The act was unopposed at the time it was created and has been used a few times throughout history. It was used by Woodrow Wilson in World War I. It was used by Franklin Roosevelt in World War II to intern Japanese, so that's not a very good example. And it was used in the War of 1812 by James Madison. He also wants to do the Insurrection Act of 1807. That allows the federal government to deploy the National Guard to suppress civil disorder, insurrection, and rebellion. This was used by JFK, it was used by Eisenhower, it was used after the Hurricane Hugo lootings, and it was used after the Rodney King riots in 1992. But this also runs up against the Posse Comitatus Act. The Posse Comitatus Act says that you can't deploy the military on your own civilians. But notably, you're still allowed to deploy the National Guard and the Air Guard and the Coastal Guard in this way. So it is possible that he could do this. And there is some precedent for this, but it is a little sketchy. What this current immigration policy harkens back to is what Eisenhower did in 1954. Eisenhower did this with an operation that I can't say on YouTube, so I'm going to call it Operation Rhymes with Setback, and you can look it up on Wikipedia if you want. In 1954, Eisenhower did short-lived military-style tactical operations to remove Mexican immigrants. This was originally a request by the Mexico government because they wanted their workers back, but it quickly went into some territory that wasn't very good. It started with Greyhound buses taking thousands of Mexicans back. They did operational sweeps where they checked southern farms for undocumented people. They rounded up people using local police, and they used roadblocks to dissuade migrants from heading north. They also did deportation by sea, and they did airlifts from the Midwest. One of the biggest problems with this is how it was done. They were dropped to unfamiliar parts of Mexico, and 88 people died from heat. They weren't given proper food, they weren't given proper housing, they were just kind of dumped off. And it's a little scary that some Republicans seem fine with this strategy, but I think this has to be done in a humane way. But the question is, of course, can you do this in a humane way? Again, JD Vance says he thinks it's reasonable to deport 1 million a year. That seems optimistic if we're trying to do this humanely. So if Trump does this, it's going to have to be slow, or it's going to be a disaster. Now I want to get to some of my thoughts on this. First of all, birthright citizenship, that can't end. Again, that's not only can it not legally end because it's part of the Constitution, morally it shouldn't end. He shouldn't do that. Secondly, he shouldn't be deporting dreamers or DACA recipients now. DACA recipients came here when they were children, and they shouldn't just be sent back to a country that they have no idea what to do there. Those things are obvious, and I think more Republicans should be in support of that. So I'm hoping this is just locker room talk from Trump. But something needs to change. I've heard people like Destiny say that the problem is asylum seeking and the problem isn't actually securing the border. This is just factually not true. The problem is clearly both. Yes, the asylum system is broken and it would be fixed with something like the Remain in Mexico Act and hiring more judges and having more funding. Absolutely, those things are true. But a lot of people are sneaking across the southern border and not getting caught by Homeland Security. Just as an example to show how much of a problem this is, since 2021, there were 2 million known gotaways that crossed the southern border. Now, a gotaway is defined as somebody that sneaks across the border and that DHS has either confirmed evidence or they have indirect evidence that that person has entered the country and they have not caught them. Those are people that, as the name implies, have got away. So if people are trying to say on the left that this isn't a problem, this is 2 million people that you haven't done any background checks on. You don't know if these people are cartel members. I think it's worth separating those from asylum seekers, because if you're an asylum seeker or you're on an expired visa, at least you've been vetted to some extent by the US government. But for these people, there's been no vetting. So I don't know how we're going to sit here and pretend like the only problem is asylum claims. That's just mental to me. The border also has to be strengthened for other reasons. There was 9,000 pounds of fentanyl since 2021 that came across the southern border. That's enough to kill like all the elephants on the earth, like 5 times over, okay? That's a lot of fentanyl. Now, it could be argued that the fentanyl problem is just a non-solvable problem because fentanyl is already like 100 times stronger than morphine, and carfentanil is 100 times stronger than fentanyl. And so if one suitcase packed with fentanyl got across like once a year, that would be enough to supply the entire contiguous United States for that year. You're never going to stop it. So you do probably have to put pressure on Mexico or China to stop the production of these things. That's a different story. It's a multifaceted issue, but it still is something that we need to stop. It still is something that we need to have security at these borders. We can't have drug mules coming across with a bunch of drugs that are going to kill our citizens. We can't do that. He also needs to employ what's called a consequence delivery system. A consequence delivery system is defined as a series of consequences that apply to people illegally crossing to prevent repeated border crossings. A lot of illegal immigrants that are caught for the 3rd or 4th time. According to Advances in U.S. Border Enforcement, a review of the consequence delivery systems published by the Migration Border Institute, we see the following. Page 17 of this document shows the recidivism rates for the different modes of consequence delivery system. If we use voluntary return, it's at 31%. If we use expedited removal, it's at 18%. If we use standard prosecution, it's only 9%. And if we use streamlining, it's 8%. Streamlining, in case you didn't know, is when you can prosecute up to 70 migrants at a time. So for all the people saying this would be unwieldy to go through all these immigrants, if they're streamlined and you can do 70 at a time, it starts to feel more manageable. So what does this show? This clearly shows that the consequence for being found to have crossed the border illegally is going to be a deterrent in if you decide to do it again. And so the reality is we need to change the incentive structure. Currently, the incentive is to go in and claim asylum, And if you ever do get caught, you just get sent back and now you can try again. Whereas if you have a proper consequence delivery system, that will be less likely to happen. So it might sound discompassionate, but clearly if someone is breaking into the country and violating federal law, there needs to be a consequence that's going to prevent recidivism. Charlie Munger said, "Show me the incentive and I'll show you the outcome." And I think conversely, we could say, show me the bad outcome and I'll show you the bad incentive structure. And I think in all of these immigration issues, we clearly see what the bad outcome is and we can see what the bad incentive is. Of course, these people want to leave their countries. If they're in poverty, they want to leave. But for an asylum claim to be valid, poverty is not a valid asylum claim. You have to have persecution based on a protected class, fear for your life, fear of torture. It can't just be that you're just impoverished. As much as we want to help these people, that's just not an immigration policy that a country can have to help absolutely everybody. These things have to be done in an orderly and measured way, and that's why we have immigration caps. That's why we have asylum caps. And yes, we need a proper way to process these applications, but we have to be prudent about it. We have to be efficient about it, and we have to be smart about it. And I think there's nothing wrong with a country wanting to defend its own borders, okay? That is like a weird, far left-leaning take to be like anti-border, and I don't think most Americans are in that place. I think most Americans want safe borders, and they want the people that are here to be the people that should be here. Tom Homan is an important character to understand as he was appointed as Trump's border czar, and he said a lot of controversial and hot takes about immigration. Tom Homan started as a border patrol agent. He was the first director of ICE that actually rose up through the ranks. He's also worked under 6 presidents, starting with Ronald Reagan. One thing Tom Homan says is that all of these people that are here are criminals, and that becomes a kind of semantic confusion that happens in these discussions, because when we talk about only deporting the criminals, what do we mean? Because from Tom Homan's perspective, anyone that has crossed illegally into the United States, not at a port of entry, is considered a criminal. But there's also the types of criminals where you've crossed in and then you've done a criminal act. And so when Trump talks, it's kind of sometimes hard to tell if he's talking about a criminal who has done a criminal act beyond just the mere crossing of the border, or if he just means anyone who is even on an overstayed visa. But it's not like there aren't a ton of illegal immigrants that have also done serious crimes. In fact, there are 650,000 known criminal illegal immigrants that have done crimes. And yes, some of these are things like traffic violations, but 200,000 are like super serious things like burglary and robbery and assault and essay and murder. Like, these are some seriously bad people that we have in the country that we want to remove from the country. And I think we should all be able to agree that those people need to go. And these numbers are almost certainly underestimates. As Reuters says, most states and cities do not track the immigration status of alleged criminal offenders or make such data available. Some jurisdictions explicitly prohibit collecting that information. These are places like sanctuary cities, like all of California. So it's very hard to get numbers from California and places like it to figure out exactly how many criminal illegal immigrants there are, or even how many illegal immigrants there are in total. Now I want to briefly look at the Border Act of 2024, because this is a left-wing talking point that gets brought up an awful lot. This was something that was proposed bipartisanly that Trump ended up shooting down. So let's look at it and see if it was a good bill. This bill had what's called a trigger authority, called the Border Emergency Authority. This would let illegal immigrants be deported if they don't enter at a point of entry without letting them apply for asylum. This could be activated if the number of encounters reached a daily average of 4,000 over the course of a week, and would be activated if it hit 5,000 or 8,500 in one day. Now, importantly, this requires that people can still seek asylum at a port of entry, and requires that the government maintain capacity for 1,400 daily entries in this manner. This can't be activated for more than 270 days, 225 days, and 180 days in subsequent calendar years. It also raises the bar of what constitutes a believable asylum claim from significant to reasonable, which, even though that sounds like a lesser standard, is actually a higher standard. Every asylum claim goes through what's called a fear interview, which is when a border agent tries to assess the degree of fear or perceived fear that someone is showing to see if their asylum claim is believable. And when doing those fear claims, you usually have to show a significant amount of fear or a significant likelihood of fear. This border bill changed it from significant to reasonable. And in 2023, 65% of people passed credible fear interviews and only 44% passed reasonable fear interviews. Therefore, reasonable is actually a higher standard. And it also provided funds for ICE to keep 50,000 detention beds available. Finally, it was supposed to provide a pathway to citizenship for dreamers and also fund 4,300 new asylum officers. So why was it rejected? It was voted 49 yes and 50 no. Initially, the aid was cited because it was bundled together with aid for Ukraine, Taiwan, and Israel. Yet, this was taken away in a future bill and it failed even more. Most Republicans seem to think it just wasn't enough. Most of the GOP was comparing it to another Republican bill, H.R. 2, which would have reduced grounds for asylum reinstituted Remain in Mexico and forced Biden to continue building the border wall. In other words, most people thought that it didn't solve the problem enough and it added more complications that would limit executive action to be taken in the future. Perhaps most importantly, while this is a common left-wing talking point to talk about that if right-wing people really cared about immigration, they would have voted on this bill, the truth is that Biden can do this anyway through executive action. And I know that because he did do it through executive action. In June of 2024, he did a proclamation on securing the border, which triggers the same trigger we talked about when the daily encounters reaches 2,500 and reopens when it decreases to 1,500. So all the stuff that was said in the border bill could be done by Biden, and then most of it was done by Biden a few months after the second reinstitution of the bill failed. So what do I hope is going to happen? I hope Trump is going to take executive action, but in a limited context. I don't think it's feasible either ethically or socially or fiscally or economically to deport all the illegal immigrants that are possibly working. I think the economists are right, and that would be an absolute shit show for everybody. I think he should not remove DACA because I just think that's immoral and shouldn't be done. I definitely think he shouldn't get rid of jus soli birthright because, again, that's a violation of the 14th Amendment, and that one is definitely not going to happen. I do think he should declare war on the cartels and declare them a terrorist organization. I am glad that Tom Homan is in charge because I do think we need someone that's tough on immigration. And that's about it. I've tried to keep this brief. I've tried to just give a summary. A lot of this is scattershot, which is probably why I couldn't find a good video on it. A lot of this is just pull quotes that Trump has said in speeches or rallies or stuff that Tom Homan has said or stuff that Tom Homan said like 5 years ago or stuff Trump said in 2018. A lot of this is kind of all over the place. So I've tried to condense my findings on it and give you my thoughts on it. And I'm curious, what do you think about the immigration policies? Do you think that they're too severe? And more importantly, do you think that Trump is actually going to do what he says? Or do you think he's just bloviating? Let me know in the comments down below.